You're sleepy, fatigued, cognitive declines, long-term memory loss. The correlation with dementia and Alzheimer's is always there with the fragmented deep sleep. Hormone imbalances is big. It's a huge one. Anything controlled by hormones, such as blood pressure, blood sugar, cortisol, insulin, all of these things are controlled during deep sleep. So if we miss deep sleep, that's our big correlation and why we have such a higher percentage of people that have diabetes or high blood pressure, etc., when they have sleep apnea or a sleep disorder.
Welcome back to Breathing for Better Sleep with Dr. Fred Eck. Today we're tackling one of the most misunderstood topics in sleep: REM sleep versus deep sleep. Most people focus on how long they sleep, but very few understand what kind of sleep their body actually needs to heal, regulate emotions, and function well during the day. Let's break that down. Dr. Eck, most people think sleep is one long uniform state. Why is it so important to understand the different stages of sleep serve completely different purposes?
There's essentially 4 stages of sleep, and they serve different purposes. So if we can sleep a long time, but if we don't spend an adequate amount of time in certain stages, and particularly deep in REM sleep, then it can have an impact on us. Based on which stages of sleep that are affected, there can be different symptoms or medical conditions created. For example, a child with low REM sleep will have cognitive deficits and difficulty learning and testing well. They can also have behavioral issues like ADHD, where low deep sleep can result in low growth hormone and a lack of physical or orthodontic development. So the stages are very important.
And when someone says, I slept 8 hours, but I still feel exhausted, how often is that about missing the right stages of sleep rather than not sleeping long enough?
But if somebody's getting 8 hours, for most people, that should be adequate. So if they sleep 8 hours, it's not about not sleeping enough. It's all about their fragmented sleep. With the 4 stages of sleep, stage 1, stage 2, deep sleep, and then REM. REM and deep sleep should be 20 to 25% of your sleep each night. This can vary a little bit by age, but we want to get them into that percentage. And if you have somebody whose REM or deep sleep are significantly below 20%, it's going to have an impact on them no matter how long they sleep.
Let's start with deep sleep. In simple terms, what does deep sleep do for the body and brain that no other stage can actually do?
That stage of sleep, known as deep or slow wave sleep, provides very important functions, and it's characterized by the brain metabolism slowing down, lower respiratory rates, heart rate and blood pressure are lowered during this stage of sleep. Your core body temperature lowers during this stage of sleep. This is the stage of sleep at which parasomnia, such as sleepwalking and sleep talking, happen. As we mentioned earlier, growth hormone peaks during this stage of sleep. It's associated with restful, restorative sleep. It requires the highest level of stimulus for arousal. So it's the hardest to wake up out of deep sleep compared to the other stages of sleep. It's a stage of sleep which your body flushes the brain of amyloid proteins. We talked about this a little bit in the previous episode, where, that's important in the prevention of dementia and Alzheimer's. So it's a very, very important function that happens.
Well, I remember it's the lymphatic system that you mentioned. I think it was last episode. It's kind of like the lymphatic system, but of the brain. Its function is to flush the toxins out of the brain when you're sleeping, correct?
Yes, the toxins, but also those proteins. Your body produces these proteins, amyloid proteins, every day. It's part of what your body does, and they accumulate around the brain. And during deep sleep, and only during deep sleep, your body flushes those away. So if you're not in deep sleep enough, those will accumulate around the brain. And in fact, that's one of the tests that we do a lot of times for Alzheimer's and dementia, is an MRI looking at the brain and seeing that those proteins are accumulating. So it serves a very, very important function.
Oh, I understand. And you say that only happens in deep sleep. And so, what kind of symptoms do you see when someone consistently misses deep sleep, even if they don't realize it?
You're sleepy, fatigue, cognitive declines, long-term memory loss. The correlation with dementia and Alzheimer's is always there with the fragmented deep sleep. Hormone imbalances is big. It's a huge one. Anything controlled by hormones, such as blood pressure, blood sugar, cortisol, insulin, all of these things are controlled during deep sleep. So if we miss deep sleep, that's our big correlation and why we have such a higher percentage of people that have diabetes or high blood pressure, etc., when they have sleep apnea or a sleep disorder.
And I'm guessing that just simple things like the ordinary, not being able to focus, just not functioning as well, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not those symptoms that are more severe, you still have less capacity to function throughout the day.
Yes, daytime sleepiness, fatigue, all of this stuff, has an impact. A lot of people don't realize the dangers of having people out driving every day that have these issues because sleepy driving causes more accidents than DUIs and drugs combined.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. I never even thought about that. And yeah, your ability to react in time is just not as sharp, right? When you're lacking proper sleep, when you're not well rested. And I think we normalize that. Like so many people are walking around be feeling in this way, like not being as sharp or not being as awake. And it's just kind of like their permanent state. They don't really notice that perhaps they do have a sleeping situation going on.
And a lot of people do it and they just say, oh, I got 5 hours of sleep. I'll be okay. But, there's a lot of impact from that. And like you said, everybody just kind of normalizes, I need my third cup of coffee before I can get going today. Like that's just become normalized and that's not normal.
Yeah, we shouldn't really need so much external stimuli to feel energized, right? That should be an integrative part of the body's balance function to wake up energized. Because that's what in theory that's what sleep is for, right? To renew our energy so that we can go about our day in the best way possible. Dr. Eck, now shifting to REM sleep. Most people associate that state of sleep with dreaming, but what is REM sleep actually responsible for beyond the dreams?
So REM stands for rapid eye movement. And that is what REM sleep is characterized by, a lot of rapid eye movement. It is also characterized by the dreaming, as you mentioned, and muscle atonia, which means our muscles in our body essentially go limp. We lose tone in our muscles. Glycine release causes inhibition of the motor neurons that leave the spinal cord, resulting in essentially the paralysis of the body during REM sleep. Therefore, the body becomes paralyzed while the cortex, the brain, is very active. And so your eyes and your brain are going, but the rest of you is essentially paralyzed. Memories are also consolidated for males that have ED, etc. Erections can occur in REM sleep. REM sleep should, as I mentioned, ideally, as we get a little older, we need a little less, 15 to 20%. Most adults, 20, 25. But in infants, REM sleep should be about 50% of their sleep.
And in infants, it should be a higher percentage because they are learning, like they're learning more. So that consolidation of memory is kind of like in some sort of way, I guess,
Yeah,
how do I,
everything is new to them.
everything is new to them.
So,
So they're creating new
yeah.
memories, right? Okay, that's so interesting.
And also the
Um,
REM sleep is also kind of your longest stage of sleep. So normal would be an hour and a half, 90 to 110 minutes for each cycle of REM sleep. And when you sleep, your body goes through this cycle, stage one, stage two, deep sleep, REM sleep. Okay. And if you get pulled out of a stage of sleep, you go all the way back to step one again and start over. Okay. And you should cycle through all the stages of sleep 4 to 6 times a night.
and so I've heard, Dr. Ike, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that if you wake up in the wrong stage of sleep, then that's another reason for you to be kind of groggy.
You, if
Is
you get
that right?
woken up
Or one of the
abruptly, it can have an impact, but the biggest impact really is what percentage of your sleep. So you might sleep only 4 hours, but you could feel better if you spent 20 to 25% of your night in REM and 25% of your night in deep sleep with only 4 hours of sleep, but your cycle is good. You could feel better than the person who spent 8 hours. Okay. I had a consult this afternoon, and this lady's exhausted all day long, and they have her on a CPAP. She can't figure out why it's not working for her in this regard. But with her CPAP, her sleep test shows that she has 0% deep sleep and only 10% REM sleep. She's sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. It doesn't matter if you're not getting into these stages of sleep, you're still going to be tired.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask earlier, actually, that if you could be one of those people that function well on 5 hours of sleep, if they do go through all the stages. Because I think that even I have gone through that where I sleep 5 hours and like periods of my life where I've slept 5 hours, but they were like super good sleep. And I just felt like I functioned better than other times in my life where I slept more. Or, for example, there's been times where you take this nap and you feel like you slept for a year because you wake up so refreshed.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's even better than your night sleep. Does that mean that your nap you just kind of went and spent a lot of time in deep sleep, or what
Yeah, you can.
happens?
I mean, if you can get past that light sleep and get into, that deep sleep quickly, you know, then it's not just about the hours. It's not just about the quantity. It is about the quality of the sleep.
And how does poor REM sleep show up in someone's emotional health, mood, or ability to handle stress?
I mean, this is becoming a real big area in sleep. Thankfully, the word and the research is getting out to the psychiatrists and psychologists because it has a huge impact on our psychosis. Children with ADHD and behavioral issues, adults with anxiety and depression, there's a 500% increase in these in adults that have a sleep disorder. It impairs the brain's ability to process emotions. So low REM sleep significantly impairs the ability to handle stress by disrupting emotional regulation, increasing what's called the amygdala reactivity. So, which is the exaggerated, heightened response of the brain's threat detection, right? The amygdala is in charge of that. The emotional stimuli, the fear of stress, and it's kind of common for people to fear stress. That whole thing just gets out of balance with low REM sleep. The amygdala is a small, kind of almond-shaped set of nuclei located deep in the temporal lobes of the brain. It's acting as the primary hub for processing emotions, particularly fear, threat detection, and the fight or flight response. Right? So it plays a critical role in social behavior in the ability to handle emotions.
So when REM sleep is not happening in a balanced way, or when there's not enough of it, then the amygdala gets irritated per se, and that makes us more edgy or irritable or less capable to handle stress. We're more reactive.
Right. You increase the amygdala reactivity. So you're just getting exaggerated, heightened responses.
And where does breathing and airway stability come into this? How does disrupted breathing affect deep sleep differently than REM sleep?
So sleep apnea, and not always, but often, is going to affect REM sleep more severely than deep sleep because muscle tone, particularly in the throat, right? So remember, we talked about muscle atonia, right? Paralysis of the muscles during REM sleep. Well, that includes the muscles of your airway, all muscles, right? So muscles are most relaxed during REM sleep, leading to more frequent, longer, and more dangerous collapses of the airway during that stage of sleep, during REM sleep. resulting in deeper oxygen desaturations and more significant cardiovascular strain during REM sleep. There's a thing called REM AHI, which is critical in mood disorders, psychiatry patients, and in kids. Okay. And anyone with a mood disorder or cognitive short-term memory issues. Studies show getting more REM sleep helps with test taking. So it's been shown that rather than cram 2 more hours for the test, you're actually better to get those extra 2 hours of sleep, and your test taking will be better.
I've experienced this for sure. I think that many times that I stayed up and, just try to study when I was so sleepy, it just didn't work. Like the next day I'm tired, and none of the things that I tried studying for stuck in my brain in any form of shape. And is one of these stages more vulnerable to sleep apnea, snoring, or microarousals than the other? You mentioned that REM would be more.
Yeah, REM is more the decrease in the genioglossus muscle tone from that atonia, right? That's one of the tongue muscles during REM sleep, caused by inhibition of the hypoglossal nerve, significantly increases the risk of upper airway obstructions. So REM sleep is definitely where there's more risk.
And people often wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. and assume that it's stress or aging. I've heard that it's like cortisol that rises around that time, and that's why they wake up. But what can that pattern tell you about what's happening in their sleep stages?
And we also always have to take into account age as well. There's a thing called the circadian rhythm shift. And what that is as we age, your body's clock advances, right? As we get older, we tend to fall asleep earlier and wake up earlier. So my father, for instance, he can go to bed at 7 o'clock at night. 8 o'clock at night, I would say probably is a normal time for him to go to sleep. But he's up at 4 a.m. So he just starts earlier, gets up earlier. And this happens sometimes as we get older. It's the opposite with teenagers. A lot of people just don't understand, like, oh, my teenager, he just wants to be up all night. Well, that's how we're built. They want to go to bed later and sleep later. So that clock in them is just different. Okay. That's why when you see, like when I was a kid, like we started high school at 7:15 in the morning. I was up at 6 in the morning. This is actually not good for teenagers, because as teenagers, we want to be up later because that's what our clock is doing. So we need to be able to sleep in a little bit later. So these schools are not taking this into account with kids. And they should be starting high school at a later time. It would actually be beneficial for these kids. And it's something that's never thought about.
Oh, this is so interesting that you mentioned that. I always thought that this was wrong because it's not what you usually hear. Like I remember when I was younger, I wanted to be up later in the night, and I thought that I was wrong. I wanted to sleep later and wake up later. And every morning that I was up at 6:30 a.m. to go to school, I was suffering. Like it took me, my appetite was not there. Like it took me a while to get up. And honestly, I was falling asleep in school. Like it was hard for me to regulate my temperature even. And yeah, either I was cold in school, or I was falling asleep, or I was hungry all the time because I felt like I didn't have energy. I always thought it was a torture to go to school so early in the morning.
I think there will come a time in the next few years, because this is just becoming more and more well known. And the more psychiatrists and psychologists start to pay attention to this sleep issue for their patients, then I think it'll be a little bit more common for people to talk about this, and hopefully they can change this. Yeah, it's great in high school to be out of school at 1:45 in the afternoon and have your whole day, but it's really not good for these kids to get up that early at that age, because they're going to stay up. they're not going to fall asleep. That's not what their clock wants them to do at the time. So all you're doing is cutting their sleep. And as soon as you cut the amount of REM sleep and deep sleep that a kid has, then you're affecting them forever and ever.
Yeah, and it's not productive for school because they're not learning to their full of their abilities, right? And
Right.
their capacity to learn is impaired, at least for that moment. And Dr. Ek, what time do you think it would be like the best time for kids to go to school?
I mean, I think starting school at like, 9 or 9:30, so the kid can sleep in and get their proper amount of sleep cycles in would be ideal.
And um, speaking of misconceptions, if there was one misconception you could clear up about REM versus deep sleep that could change how people think about their health, what would it be?
Simply that people think it's all the same. Sleep is sleep. 8 hours of sleep is 8 hours of sleep. And these stages of sleep serve very, very distinctive roles with very different consequences when they are disrupted. So it's not just about how long you sleep. It's about the quality of your sleep. And when we're talking about the kids, the cognitive deficits that are happening because of the sleep disorders that are happening, these are creating cognitive deficits that won't even necessarily show up for years, but they're happening. And the longer the child has the sleep disorder, the more cognitive deficits they're going to have. And oftentimes it doesn't show up until they get older. They get into high school and into more advanced classes, or they get into college where they're trying to learn harder stuff. And then it starts to show up. And then that's also sometimes when it starts to show up in the behavioral issues as well.
And I think that even though, like you mentioned earlier, we are now becoming more aware of the importance of sleep and people are talking about it more, it still has been a problem that we put on the kids or on the teenagers. Oh, why aren't you learning properly? Why aren't you not paying attention? Why are you so irritable? And yeah, of course, there's this stage of, being a teenager where they're growing and self-discovery and all these type of things, but so little of their behavior are we pointing to uh sleep as a cause or lack of it. And yeah,
It's just being ignored. And the sleep component of it is just being ignored. And we have to somehow change that. When I was a kid, I didn't have half to 3/4 of my friends with mood disorders and medications and ADD and ADHD. But my 16-year-old son, 3/4 of his kids, of his friends, are in these categories. I mean, you have a whole thing now that's used to never be a thing. And there's a cause to it.
Yeah, that's true. I've heard that a lot. My parents mentioned that as well, how there was no such thing as ADD or ADHD. And I think potentially, like, you know, playing outside and experiencing more time away from the screens and actually, experiencing the world was probably some positive factor that attributed to better sleep also, right? Yeah, more movement and physical activity.
Yeah. Physical activity makes us tired. So it makes us able to actually go to sleep. It's one of the things that we tell people with insomnia to do. When you have insomnia, you want to make sure that you exercise and do things to kind of wear yourself out, for lack of a better term, right? So that you can sleep better. But then there's also times of the day that you don't want to do these things. Like you don't want to exercise and get your sympathetic nervous system going 2 hours before you're going to bed. So there's also times of the day that these things can be done that are beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. I've experienced that. So a good idea would be to work out more in the morning or
For sleep purposes, it's
afternoon.
better.
Thank you, Dr. Eck. Well, sleep isn't just about getting enough hours. It's about whether your body and brain are actually completing the work they're designed to do at night. If you're sleeping but not recovering, this conversation might explain why. Share this episode with someone who says, I sleep, but I'm still tired. And to learn more about how breathing impacts sleep quality, visit sleeptreatmentdirect.com. Better breathing, better sleep, better life.